us today. You can present yourself and take over, please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so very much for attending this event. And I really want to thank all of the organizers and people from around the world who have been supporting and working to form the World Independent Living Network. My name is Judy Heumann. I'm living in Washington, D.C. And the first Center for Independent Living that was created in the United States in Berkeley, California, I was one of the founders. Ed Roberts, Phil Draper, a number of other people helped found the Berkeley Center for Independent Living. Basically because as people with more significant disabilities, they did not want to be living in institutions, and they did not want to be restricted in their home. And I came from Brooklyn, New York to Berkeley, and one of the roles that I was playing with the formation of the CIL in Berkeley was really to help it become both intergenerational and knowledgeable about the needs of younger disabled individuals and older disabled individuals. The organization was made up of people at that point who primarily had physical disabilities and were blind or low vision. What we have seen since 1973, when the first center occurred, is an expansion in the United States and countries around the world, where our voices as disabled people have been becoming stronger. And for many of us with more significant disabilities, I would say that one of the very important aspects of the independent living movement is that we very much understand the depth and the breadth of the types of services that we need. And we've been very strong advocates within our countries, our local communities, and around the world to give voice to the fact that the significance of one's disability should not result in a limited ability to participate equally in our communities. The statement that came out from WIN on June 14th, 2021, at the Costa side event, I think is one that I hope you all look at, because this statement really speaks about the importance of government supporting the creation and development of the independent living movement, and the ability to have relatively uniform definitions. And by that, we're really looking at ensuring that the breadth of people who have various forms of disabilities are seen as valued, and the fact that government needs to be supportive, as well as, in my view, the private sector and businesses. One of the other essential aspects of this statement was the impact of COVID. And one of the very tragic aspects of COVID is that the truth has been seen that disabled people around the world have been victims of the fact that what we as disabled people have been saying for generations, which is that disabled people should not be living in institutions, that we need to be living integrated in the community, and that for many of us, we also need additional supports. But in many countries, in the beginning and still later on, our support workers, our personal assistants, were not considered essential workers. And as such, we're not being given the same types of protections as other essential workers. More countries, I think, because of the voices of all of you and many others around the world, have really been fighting against this issue and have seen that support staff are being seen as essential workers, which in many cases can mean that where the COVID vaccinations are available, that they are being prioritized to be able to get those very vital vaccinations. What I'm hoping we're going to see today is learning about the strength and development of the independent living movement around the world. Let's put the word independent living for a minute aside, because I know it has different translations in different countries. But for me, what we need to be looking at, and this applies in any country that we live, is our ability as disabled individuals to be able to make choices, to be able to live in a non-institutionalized setting in the community, that we as disabled people work together for the empowerment of our brothers and sisters. And that at the end of the day, Article 19 of the CRPD becomes a reality. And that reality is because of our strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy, for a very strong message about independent living, Article 19, and how that does need to become a reality. We don't want to live in institutions, and we are strong enough. Talking about human rights, but thank you very much. And we'll go from you to Shitaya Stawas from the African Disability Forum. I think you are here, Shitaya, if you would put on your camera.
Thank you,
And
Judith.
Julian. Okay, please present yourself and carry on. Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning, all. Good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Shitaya Stawas from Ethiopia. I'm working for the African Disability Forum. I'm truly thrilled and happy to be part of this great side event of the Global Summit. I've just here to say a few things. Of course, emotion overwhelmed to see Judith, a good friend, and also Jamie here. Yes, the concept of independent living in Africa is far from where you guys in the Western understood. In Africa, it's not yet on the table as an agenda. And even organizations of persons with disabilities, they do not much focused on that really essential and critical part of our lives. And this situation affected by absence of decent income and weak political commitment behind, on behalf of the African government. So persons with disabilities, the majority of persons with disabilities in Africa lead their lives in a way of interdependency on their family for like mobility, for housing, self-care, communication, and even decision making. So it's a situation of a lack of political commitment, and also, if I may, so like weak activism or weak presentation of advocacy of on behalf of the organizations of persons with disabilities. We are not yet in Africa, at least in my opinion. On the movement is not like active or vibrant on the concept of independent living. That is the situation in general. I would like to be very brief. And then on the opportunities part, now for Africa, we have the African Protocol on Disability, which is waiting now for 15 ratifications. That's one thing. And we have this emerging stronger organizations of persons with disabilities, an umbrella regional OPD for national federations in Africa. That is my organization, the African Disability Forum. So we are hoping for a better tomorrow, and we are hoping for the concept of independent living to come as one of the critical and essential agendas on this era, where we have the convention, where we are waging toward this human rights approach. Yeah, this is what I intended to say. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you. I will end here.
Thank you very much, Shatai. Thank you for giving us this challenge for the independent living movement. And I wish very much luck for the regional umbrella organization to become strong and for the African protocol to be ratified. Thank you. We will go on to, oops, my camera's off again. None of these buttons around here. We will go now to Stig Landberg, who is the former member of the CRPD committee. Stig, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I think that independent living is probably one of the most important aspects in disability politics at all. I think that I will be giving a presentation which takes from my personal experience and through that up to my political influence or impact on independent living schemes around the world. I was a member of the CRPD committee from 2010 to 2018, and I have also been a chairperson of the Disabled People's Organizations in Denmark, the umbrella organization, for 14 years. So I have a background in both human rights perspective and OPD perspective. Personally, I have a spinal cord injury, which I got back in '73, where I had a traffic accident, had a fracture on what we call C4, which means that I'm paralyzed in legs and arms. And therefore, I have had an independent living scheme for approximately 45 years. I have also been very much involved in the development of the independent living scheme in Denmark, which unfortunately was a little bit timely behind the US, and what Judith was talking about. Our independent living scheme emerged in Denmark in '72. Because of my independent living scheme, I've been able to be on the labor market since '85, and thereby I have been living among others, doing the same things as others, and also being saving the government, the municipalities for being they are not paying me any social benefits or any pension. I think one of the major reasons for me being involved in this dialogue is probably that I was the chairperson in the committee, in the CRPD committee, when we were drafting the general comment number 5, which is on independent living and the unfolding of Article 19 in the CRPD. If I look back on my life, I think I have 4 dates that are very important to me. The first date is actually when I was born in 1956 on the 20th of November. The second important date when I was having my accident on the 11th of August in '73. And my third very important date in my life was when I was married on the 11th of May 2002. But the most important date is actually the date when I got my independent living scheme. That is one of the dates that I will never forget. It was on the 14th of January 1978, but it was 5 years after my injury. In those years, I was institutionalized because there were no option for me to have independent living scheme. After my injury, there was no doubt in my head or any other's head that I should have an education. But there were much doubt on how to live or where to live. I had three options. I could stay home with my mom, and then she could be my carer, which was the option many at that age took. And secondly, I could be offered to go to a nursing home, staying together with older people, not far from my place of where we were living, but still very distant from others, and being 17 and supposed to be living together with people who were 80, 85 were not something that I really fancied. So I took the third decision, the third option, and that was to move into an institution for younger people with mobility impairment. That was the three options. No independent living scheme, but out of the three options, I chose to be institutionalized instead of living home. Uh, but what did actually happen when you were institutionalized? I could not decide who to assist me when to shower or how to shower, who to dress me in the morning, who to assist me while eating, who to drive me to school, when to go to the cinema, go alone or go with a group. I was deprived of all rights, all individual rights. Everything was determined by others or should be done in groups. In 1972, there were one municipality in Denmark who actually somehow rebelled against the law and introduced independent living schemes. And at that time, they thought that it was very few people who actually were in the target group for independent living, and that it was only to be provided for, let's say in Denmark, probably 100 people or so. But the law was not allowing for independent living schemes. So they rebelled and introduced it anyway. Today, this municipality is the founding father of independent living scheme in Denmark, and it is now nationally and it is within the law, but dominantly provided to persons with mobility impairment and not to persons with intellectual or cognitive or any kind of other forms of disabilities. Today we can get in Denmark, we can get 24 hours care assistance, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And if someone is requiring more than one personal assistant, it is able to get more than one. If you are having the use of ventilator or something, then you can have, for instance, you can have two persons 24 hours per day. And the expenses, of course, I'm coming from a wealthy country. Denmark is probably one of the most wealthy countries across the globe, but we do not have to pay anything for the the independent living schemes ourselves. It is 100% funded by the authorities. The Danish disability organizations have always been very closely consulted while developing the rules, the regulations concerning independent living schemes. In Denmark, it is quite easy to have access to the decision-making process. It is quite easy to have access to the politicians, and they are very open to be guided or influenced by the civil society organizations, and locally, especially towards groups of persons with disabilities. We have a very strong saying regarding disability matters. It is written into the law that persons with disabilities should be consulted through their representative organizations on matters of importance to persons with disabilities. And because of that, I think that independent living schemes in Denmark have improved over years. Of course, it can still be improved, but it is not that bad compared to other countries. I would say if you should put independent living scheme in Denmark on a scale from heaven or hell, then we would be somewhere in the middle, but closer to heaven than closer to hell. I know that independent living scheme is quite expensive in the views from politicians, from administration, but I do believe that it is not that expensive if you compare to the expenses of other measures that should be given to me instead of independent living scheme. The expenses of living in an institution is way above the expenses that is that independent living is costing. I think that independent living schemes can be introduced in all countries in different forms, having the focus of giving persons with disabilities the possibility of choosing where to live, how to live, and to be assisted by those that are selected by themselves. I don't think that we will see the same independent living scheme across all countries, but I think it is possible to develop a scheme within all countries that is taking into consideration the financial, cultural, and social background of each country. So I hope that the independent living movement across the world will be able to be invited into the political or administrative areas to guide state parties on how to develop independent living schemes to the benefit of society, but especially to the benefit of persons with disabilities themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stig. Thank you for your personal experience on self-determination, but also your work on the General Common 5, which is important for us when it comes to the progress in independent living, as well as the understanding of the definitions which Judy took up. We will then go on to the next person, who is Shigeto Itani from the Japanese CIL. please, I give the floor over to you. Shigeto.
Hi, thank you. Yeah. My name is Shigeto Itani. I run CIL in Matsuyama, home of Japan's famous Dogo Hot Springs. I am chairing peer counseling committee. I'd like to present about IL movement in Japan. One of the best achievements of Japanese IL movement is the personal attendance service funded by governments. Severely disabled person can receive 24 hours PS services in Japan. In early 70s, the group of people with cerebral palsy called Bluegrass left the institution and started living independently by promoting volunteers to help. Due to their advocacy, Tokyo and other cities have started the very first PS services. In mid-late 80s, USIL movement like Judy Heumann have empowered Japanese disability rights leaders. That's how Japanese IL movement have started to spread community living, and because of that, PA services also spread across Japan. IL centers not only train PS, but also conduct programs for persons with disabilities on how to use PS. Thus, IL centers in Japan operate both in balance advocacy and operation management. In Japan, there are 1,700 municipal cities in accordance with national law. The actual hours of PA services are determined by municipal cities. There are gaps between cities where stronger the movement. More hours of PS provided and the other not so much. 120 independent living centers across Japan negotiated with each of local municipal government so that most cities now provide 24 hours PS services to those who have severe disabilities. Japanese PS services have started with the movement of physically disabled populations. However, in recent years, the service has also been modified to include people with psychiatric and intellectual disabilities. Current problems are, for example, in certain rural areas, even with PA service in Japan in place. Sometimes there aren't PA dispatch organization or municipal government is simply unaware of PA services. We need to work so that no matter where you live, people who need PA should be able to receive services for 24 hours. Modification of the law has widened opportunities for those who have psychiatric or intellectual disabilities. However, it is still very much limited. are not wide enough to cover the population. We need to ensure to include people with psychiatric and intellectual disabilities in our IL movement in order to truly achieve de-institutionalization. We, IL centers across Japan, will work in solidarity toward full implementation of CRPD to ensure the rights of persons with disabilities are protected no matter where you live. Thank you.
And thank you, Shigeto, for this, the glimpse of the Japanese experience when it comes to personal assistance services and the problem of the rural areas, which I think would be a common denominator in most of our countries, no matter where we are in the, where we are with independent living. Thank you very much. We'll go on to Shafiq Urrehman, sorry for the name, milestone from Pakistan. I give you the floor, Shafiq.
I don't think Shafiq is here.
That's what I was wondering. I'm looking around here, but I don't see any name there. Okay, which means we skip Shafiq and we go to Wendy, Patricia Barantes Jimenez from Costa Rica on the political and social participation in Costa Rica. Please, Wendy, the floor would be yours then.
Gracias, muy buenos días. Es para mí un grato placer poder estar en este importante evento para contarles un poco acerca de las buenas prácticas que se están realizando en Costa Rica para mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas con discapacidad. Para ello voy a mostrarles un pequeño PowerPoint que hice.
Wendy, sí le voy a traducir nada más para que me dé espacio. Me acaban de mandar un mensaje, entonces yo le voy a traducir para que haya lenguaje de señas también. Entonces, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I would like to show you a short presentation so I can tell you about the independent living movement in Costa Rica.
Quiero iniciar diciéndoles que algo está ocurriendo en Costa Rica.
I would like to tell you that there's something really important happening in Costa Rica.
Al igual que esta pupa de mariposa de color verde que estamos observando en la fotografía y que está en el proceso de metamorfosis para poder convertirse en una bella mariposa morfo, muchas personas con discapacidad en Costa Rica están experimentando cambios y cambios muy importantes.
Just like this puppy that is transforming into a beautiful butterfly, a lot of people in Costa Rica are experimenting changes in their lives for independent living.
Quiero además contarles que el Centro Morfo se fundó, que el Centro Morfo ha sido ese capullo a través del cual se ha venido promoviendo el cambio social que la población con discapacidad necesita para su inclusión en la sociedad.
The Morpho CIO, the Center for Independent Living, has been the cocoon through which people with disabilities are being able to change their lives and have equal rights and participation in the communities for independent living.
El Centro de Vida Independiente Morfo se fundó en el año 2012, año en el que oficialmente inició a ejecutar su primera fase. Desde acá se comenzó a implementar la filosofía de vida independiente para todas las personas con discapacidad de Costa Rica. Debido al éxito obtenido, se prorrogó con una segunda fase que concluye el próximo año en abril.
The Center for Independent Living Morpho was funded through an international cooperation project, which started in 2012. And the first phase of the project started in 2012, but we've had so much success that it was continued on a second phase that started on 2017.
Desde el Centro de Vida Independiente Morfo se brindan diferentes servicios que vienen a mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas con discapacidad. Dentro de los principales servicios están los siguientes. Como primer servicio tenemos el envío del servicio de asistencia personal, que es muy importante para poder, para que las personas con discapacidad sean incluidas dentro de su sociedad y tienen las siguientes características.
Okay, in the Independent Living Center Morpho, we have these services. The first one is the PA services, the personal assistance services, which is one of the most important tools that we have, so people with disabilities can participate in the community. And it has the following characteristics.
El servicio es controlado por las personas con discapacidad. La asistencia personal es personalizada, es decir, no se tiene que compartir con otra persona. Las personas con discapacidad son las que forman al asistente personal y el subsidio que le da el Estado debe de darse directamente a las personas con discapacidad para que estos contraten de forma directa a su asistente personal.
Okay, the service is managed by the person with the disability. It's individual and it's personalized, and it's completely subsidized by the government. The government gives a subsidy to the person so they can hire the personal assistants directly themselves.
Otro de los servicios es el empoderamiento y defensa de derechos. Desde el Centro de Vida Independiente Morfo tenemos como mayor objetivo el lograr que las personas con discapacidad alcancen el máximo de su empoderamiento. Para ello damos constantemente charlas y talleres de capacitación dirigidas al colectivo con discapacidad, sus familias y demás población en general. Y es desde este servicio, además, que promovemos y ejecutamos toda clase de estrategias de incidencia política para la defensa de todos nuestros derechos humanos y fundamentales.
Okay. The second service that we provide is Advocacy and Empowerment, and is through this service that we hold workshops and training sessions for people with disabilities and their families, so people know what their rights are and how to fight for them. And it is through this service that we've also held many different political advocacy strategies and to better the quality of life of people with disabilities.
Otro apoyo no menos importante es el servicio de apoyo entre pares. Este es un servicio dado por las mismas personas con discapacidad hacia las personas con discapacidad y consiste en un apoyo emocional no profesional porque no somos psicólogos, pero que tiene el objetivo de que estas personas recuperen la confianza en sí mismas, la confianza en las demás personas, logrando así formar agentes de cambio que trabajen por una sociedad inclusiva.
The next service is the peer support service, and it is through this non-professional service that is provided by people with disabilities for other people with disabilities that we strive to better the self-image and self-esteem of people with disabilities so we can empower them and have the new activists and people that will be striving for advocacy for their own rights and their communities.
Otro de los servicios que también brindamos es el programa de vida independiente. Este servicio tiene como fin el que las personas con discapacidad experimenten el vivir de forma independiente para que puedan potenciar y desarrollar sus habilidades y destrezas, siempre con el fin de que sean personas cada día más empoderadas.
The next service that we provide is the program for independent living, which it's a training for people with disabilities to experience independent living, then so they can develop skills for day-to-day life, and so this way experiencing independent living gives the people a new perspective on what their rights are, and it's a true vehicle for empowerment.
Otro de los servicios es articulamos con instituciones públicas y privadas. Desde su fundación, el Centro de Vida Independiente Morfo ha venido articulando con diferentes instituciones, esto para lograr la implementación y aprobación tanto de políticas públicas como de leyes que vengan a beneficiar a la población con discapacidad. Una de las más importantes ha sido la aprobación de la Ley para la Promoción de la Autonomía Personal de las Personas con Discapacidad o Ley número 9379 en mi país.
We also articulate and work closely with the local governments and public institutions. So we are able to influence policymaking, and it is through this that we were able to pass the law for independent living in Costa Rica, which is the law number 9379, which is the one that provides the independent living services and the legal framework for independent living in Costa Rica.
Con esta ley se vienen a crear dos figuras muy importantes, la del asistente personal y la salvaguardia o garante para la capacidad de actuar o capacidad jurídica de las personas con discapacidad, ya que desde el año 2016 es el año en que se aprueba esta ley y se deroga la curatela.
Okay, and it is through this law, the law for independent living in Costa Rica, that we have two new figures. One is the PA services, and the second is the safeguard for people with intellectual and emotional disabilities to be able to have their decisions respected, and so they can live independently as well.
Entre los muchos beneficios que trajo la implementación de la filosofía de vida independiente, ha sido un mayor cumplimiento de la legislación vigente, entre ellas la armonización del marco jurídico interno con la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad o Ley número 8661 en mi país, lo que ha generado un cambio paradigmático, puesto que poco a poco vamos migrando del modelo médico rehabilitador al modelo social de la discapacidad.
And the benefit of the implementation of the independent living law in Costa Rica has been the implementation as well of the CRPD, and it has also changed the way, it's been a paradigm shift from a medical perspective of the disability to a social perspective of disability.
Además de una mayor unidad entre el colectivo con discapacidad, otro de los beneficios ha sido el hecho de que las personas con discapacidad puedan ejercer y gozar su autonomía personal a través del servicio de la asistencia personal y de su capacidad de actuar, lo que a su vez ha permitido que estos ejerzan el rol que les corresponde dentro de su contexto, tanto familiar como social. Es decir, los que son padres o madres, esposos o esposas, hijos o hijos, pueden cumplir a cabalidad con ese papel y no ser más ya la persona que tiene que ser cuidada por su familiar.
Okay, through the independent living implementation here in Costa Rica, the shift has been that people with disabilities are not able to participate in their family, in the community, or in their own environment, and they're no longer the ones that need to be taken care of, but they're participating equally as a son, as a daughter, as a classmate. We are just people participating actively in the community and through and no longer being subject of care, but living independently.
Otro de los logros más importantes que se han alcanzado ha sido la creación de la Red Latinoamericana de Vida Independiente, por sus siglas RELAVIN, que desde su fundación en el 9 de mayo del año 2020 ha tenido como principal objetivo el poder implementar centros de vida independiente en toda la región latinoamericana, ya que todos los beneficios que anteriormente mencioné y que estamos experimentando en Costa Rica, los queremos para los 85 millones de personas con discapacidad que aproximadamente habitan América Latina.
Okay. Another great achievement that we've had is the creation of the Latin American Network for Independent Living, or RELAVIN in Spanish. And it is through this network that we've been able to impact all the countries in Latin America. And we want the benefits that we've experienced from independent living for all the 85 million people with disabilities that live in Latin America.
¿Cómo podemos lograr esto? Para lograr esto necesitamos el apoyo de los estados partes, organismos internacionales, sociedad civil, para que juntos hagamos esto toda una realidad. Para que se puedan aprobar leyes que crean la figura del asistente personal y que se reconozca la capacidad jurídica de las personas con discapacidad. Y que así se logren realmente los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible con su lema que nadie se quede atrás.
For this, we need the support of the state parties and in order to implement independent living in Costa Rica, in Latin America, just like we've had in Costa Rica. And we really want your support, and we want you guys to work together with us, and so we can make independent living a reality. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias por su atención y sigamos trabajando juntos por una sociedad inclusiva. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, and let's keep working together for a more inclusive society.
Thank you, Wendy. What fantastic news to hear about the success of Costa Rica and a legislation on independent living, this paradigm shift because of the CRPD, and the challenge that you have for all of Latin America and the challenge for us to work on this together. Thank you very much for that. From there, we're going to go on to Laura Hoffman, who is from the Canada Independent Living. I will give you the floor, Laura. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Well, it's good. It's morning here. I'm joining you all from the traditional and ancestral and unceded territories of the Silks people of the Okanagan Nation. I'm the executive director of Independent Living Vernon in Vernon, British Columbia, Canada, and I've been with the center since 1999, which is just unbelievable when I think about that. And I actually started with the center as a social work practicum student. And then in 2001, I moved into the position of executive director. And, you know, in the 23 years since I've been part of this movement, and it's been an absolute privilege, you know, to be able to work in this movement and to be be part of a real working family. And it's meant so much to me just on a personal level in order to be able to continue to be able to be employed as a person with a disability. And so, you know, in that time, I've seen lots of trends, right, come and go within service delivery as far as, you know, working with people with disabilities. And you know, but the independent living movement has really remained very steady in its delivery of programs and services in over 40 years, right, of service delivery. And so, you know, today, many of my colleagues have been sharing about how independent living principles are really used in program delivery and developing services and being able to, you know, help to enrich the lives of people with disabilities. But IL principles can also be used and are relied on within our organization. So within our IL centers to guide the management, to guide the structure, and to guide the funding of our organization. And so that's what I wanted to just highlight today in some of my comments. You know, and the IL principles, they really help to provide us with a clear direction of, you know, what efforts do we need to focus on within our organization, okay? And so the IL principles of consumer control, being community-based, peer support, cross-disability, integration and full participation, and being nonprofit. They're all used to guide, you know, our everyday work But they also guide the way we hire staff, the way we manage staff, the way we recruit volunteers, the way our board of directors works with our staff and works with our communities. It guides the very bylaws and constitutions of our organization. So for example, the IL principle of consumer control. In our constitution and bylaws, it's written that we require at least 51% of our board members and our staff to self-identify as people with disabilities. What this does is it really results in the majority of people working in the organization being people with disabilities. And so that shifts the power into the hands of people with disabilities. And that means our organizations are truly run by and for people with disabilities. This really makes independent living centers as organizations unique, not only within the disability movement, but also within various nonprofit settings. And so, you know, I really like to share that with other organizations, because that's how we're able to do the work that we do in communities, is because the power rests with the people that we're trying to serve, right? You know, the people that are in control are the ones that are directing the work that needs to be done, right? They're telling us. And so, so it's a really important part in that organizational structure. The IL principle of being community-based, right? That helps us to stay focused on our surrounding community, on what are the issues, what are the priorities of our local community. That helps to keep us on track as an organization. You know, so then we're not, we don't have to feel like we have to take on everything. We really got to prioritize those things that are right in front of us. You know, the principle of peer support, I think this is one of our best principles that helps us within the organization. You know, what it does is it really creates a sense of connection between our board, our staff, our consumers, our, you know, our community partners, our, you know, government officials that we work with, right? You know, even peer support within our network of centers around the world. You know, this very forum that we're in today is a, you know, demonstration of our principle of peer support, right? We want to work together in order to be able to advance the work that we want, right? And so, you know, peer support is definitely one of my favorite principles. And you know, there's lots of helping professions, and myself as a social worker, right? You know, helping professions are always talking about being client-centered. Well, IL principles are the epitome of being centered on the consumer, right? Being able to highlight that individual's experience, and then being able to support that person in what they want. And so, you know, peer support is so critical within our organization, and how we work together as staff, as board members. And so, yeah, that's probably one of my favorites. The IL principle of being nonprofit, right? That guides us to be focused on the, you know, on the mission, the values, the beliefs of our organization, versus focusing on, you know, something that isn't necessarily going to meet the needs of consumers. And so that's another important principle in how we use it within our organizations. And then finally, the last two principles around cross-disability and integration and full participation. Those both work to ensure that IL centers are valuing individual experience. And, you know, that individual experience that consumers have, right? So people with a variety of disabilities, that are coming from various cultural backgrounds, various identities, various geographic locations, all of those things. So those two principles help us in really focusing on what does that individual want, and what do they need, and then, you know, what systems do we maybe have to look at. But these principles really ensure that, you know, within our centers, that there's a diversity of perspectives, cultures, identities are all accommodated, valued, and respected within the center. And so, you know, these principles guide not only the programs and services that we deliver, but also how we manage our organization, and also how we work with other organizations in the community, and how we work with government structures and systems, right? And so they have a lot of applicability in various ways. So, you know, I think part of it, part of our success also comes from the fact that, you know, we're really focused on like the inclusion and the valuing of the inherent, you know, value of people with disabilities. We're not focused on a cure. And when we're not focused on a cure for disability, we can do really amazing things. And I think the history of independent living movement has really shown that, like what you can do when you're not focused on a cure, when you're actually focused on inclusion and accessibility, you know, for people with disabilities wherever you are. So those were just a few comments that I wanted to share. I welcome anyone reaching out to our center in Vernon, and thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the speakers.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for emphasizing or talking about all the principles, but also emphasizing the principle of consumer control, and with us leading our organizations. I think that's probably was the key to the stability you talked about of the EO services in your country. And from there, the next speaker is actually myself, where I was asked to talk about user cooperatives. Excuse me, I need a little bit of water. User cooperatives as providers of peer support and empowerment. User cooperatives was the first way personal assistants were organized in Sweden. And this was through a pilot project that Adolf Ratzka introduced in 1987, when he had come back from the United States and had introduced independent living and personal assistance in general. And through that pilot project, Sweden was able to get the concept independent personal assistance into the LSS legislation, which came into effect in 1994. And through this law, you can choose if you want to have your personal assistance in your own private company or a public company, or to have it with the local municipality, or to choose a cooperative. I chose a cooperative for my direct payment to administrate my services back in 1993. I had come into contact with Steele, which was the founder of independent living in Sweden, and had conducted this pilot project. And I felt the importance of being able to independent living and having a cooperative, which was based on these norms as you talk, or these principles that you talked about, Laura. Steele today has about 25 staff members for 160 users. We were in the cooperative, we own the cooperative. We hire a director who then hires the different people to give us the services, who then are in charge of our own personal assistance. When you join a cooperative, we had to follow a training to learn how to become an employer. It was important to know many things. And we also met in groups called peer support that you talked about, Laura, and to learn about how to be this employer, which was new to many people. I remember joining that peer support group. I had a newly acquired disability for 1991, and I learned very much to accept my disability through that peer support group, to tell you the truth. As employers, we need to know the legislations in Sweden, which are based on the directives at the EU level. We need to understand and respect working environment and safety policy. We need to know and understand discrimination, so we don't discriminate among our employees. We need to watch for bullying if it arises, these kinds of things. We need to know how to organize vacation time, sick leave, rehabilitation if it is needed. We need to know how to communicate. When do you communicate if somebody's sick or they've had an accident on the job? So there's a lot of small things which are new if you've never worked in this kind of a field. And the peer support groups were where we actually taught one another. Those who had had personal assistants for a longer time, they would give us their strategies on how to work. They would give us information on what's important to know, how to recruit a personal assistant, how to deal with conflicts, or the use of technical equipment and assistance. It can be peer support could cover issues like involve emotional challenges, power dynamics, coping strategies, and good practices learned over the years. And those meetings could be, one time or many times, depending who was actually doing the meetings. In the movement, we have seen how many disabled people do lack self-confidence and have low esteem, depending on where they're coming from, depending on the prejudice they have themselves. I remember my prejudice. Well, am I disabled? What am I going to do now? And you have to learn how to deal with that, to, how do you say, face your own prejudice and to grow with that. And I remember overcoming these prejudices, I said, through peer support and through learning about my so-called new identity. Young people can come from overprotective families. So peer support is a fantastic method to become empowered, to gain better self-esteem and self-confidence. The independent living cooperatives and peer support allow for increased self-determination with and through our personal assistance, and then being able to leave the full lives that we've been talking about, that Judy has and many of us have in this group and out in the society, when we access the supports that we need. But if we don't access the supports that we need, then we end up living in institutions and not and having our rights abused. That was the part that I was going to talk about. And then from there, we go over to Jessica, sorry about my names, Jimenez from NCIL in the USA. Please, Jessica.
That's okay. I get Jimenez, I get a lot of different. So, hi, I'm Jessica Jimenez. I am not representing Nickel right now, but I am from the United States. I actually currently live in California, and I would just like to start off with, I started getting involved with the independent living movement about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago in 2015. Wow, it's been a while. And I would say I really mentally, I got involved in college 2009, 2010. And I didn't know. I started using and utilizing the disability services on campus. And when I was growing up, I had epilepsy and I was really ashamed of it. My mom would take me to the doctors and would try to get it fixed. So we tried to get rid of it. And it wasn't until I was in college that I just was over it. And I realized that it wasn't me that was trying to fix me. It was my mom. I mean, we had health insurance and she was basically a single mom doing the best she could. And so that was something that I wanted to do for her. I've always wanted to please her. So when I got into college, it was time to please myself. And so my counselor did everything he could and told me, you're on your own now. You're 18. You do things on your own. You have to figure out your epilepsy on your own. Go to the doctors on your own. Do things on your own. And so when he taught me independence that way, it kind of made me really shift my identity, shift who I was. So I learned about the different services that were offered on campus, and it was very mind-blowing and life-changing because I ended up working on campus in the disability services as a student assistant. So I learned about the technical assistance. I learned about employment and just the different things that were offered on campus. And as Judy mentioned, she worked with Ed Roberts, and as I graduated, I learned the history about disability and independent living and how Ed Roberts did his thing at Berkeley. And I realized that I never understood that that was part of the independent living movement until I graduated. There was a whole dynamic when I was in college that I was involved. I majored in women's studies and sociology, and I noticed that a lot of the work I was doing didn't focus on disability. I mean, especially my disability, epilepsy. And so when I graduated, that was something I really wanted to learn more about. I wanted to learn about myself. I mean, I'm a Latina, a woman, and I have a disability. And I really needed to reach out to a community that really understood me. And so I got involved with Yo Disabled and Proud. It's an organization out in California. And if you would like more information, just reach out to me or any of the speakers. We are more than happy to just give you a rundown. And so that organization is basically focuses on independent living centers within the state of California. And so it helped me get involved in a center in Southern California. And from there, I went to the National Council on Independent Living, in which the organization I represent occasionally. And that's when my independent living career took off, I would say. I learned about just the 5 cores, the different cores of independent living. I wouldn't say the 5 cores, there's many more. But I was a young person at the time. I did things around youth transition and advocacy. It was really one of my main things and still has been one of my main things. And so, as I mentioned, I was learning a lot about independent living and the history. One thing I learned in my early years in 2015, 16, I learned that the disability rights, not so much disability rights, but Americans with Disability Act, that law in the United States was still fairly new. I know in many other countries, they are still fairly new. Their disability amendments or laws are still fairly new. But in the United States, it was, I mean, at the time, I was 25, 26. That law was passed in 1990. I was born in 1991. So I am part of the ADA generation. And I would just like to mention that I have a lot of privilege compared to those that were born before me that did not have that law for them, that did not have many of the things that are implemented in the law then, or that implemented in the law now. Over from 1990 to 2000, I think, was it 2015? During that time, many things were passed, and I didn't really get services until 2009, 2010. So from 1990 to 2010, there was a big gap in services that I didn't get, and a lot of privilege that I had from 2009 to 2005. And so I educate people on things that I didn't know about, things that there's so much to learn. Even now, I learned so much from my peers, young people that are in college now, young people that I've influenced, and I've told them my story. And so I know many people have broader experiences, have other experiences than I do, but many of the things that I've learned throughout my time as a young person with epilepsy especially, was that I was ashamed of it, and not so much because going to the doctor or anything like that. It was much of a stigma being one of the only kids that had this disability. And one thing was that when I was in high school, I had a seizure on the football field, and nobody from K through 12 knew that I had this. And growing up with people I went to school with, finding out I had epilepsy really took me on a back burner before I got into college and really put me in a shell. And then I just didn't like them. I was like, oh, you didn't know. And so now all my friends that know, or everybody that I've worked with in the disability movement, they make me feel more empowered, or they just, I love them even more. If I were to have a seizure with them, or we would just find something to talk about. And so I just want to say that, let's see, I have it right here. As I mentioned, I never knew I had the option. And there's a lot of people now, at least in the United States, that don't know that there's things about independent living and little resources that we have. And that was one of the main reasons when I graduated from college, because I didn't know that there were resources. And I knew there were resources, but that was something that I had to go reach out for. And when I started working at an independent living center, my main thing was about networking. I did work around reproductive health, housing, immigration, racial justice while I was in college. And so when I started working at a center, I always felt that intersectionality was something that needed to be worked on and needed to be talked about. So many of the organizations that I worked with in college, I disconnected with because they didn't work with disability groups. And so that was one of my main things as an advocate. And I still do that today. And many of them have shifted their work, which has been so amazing. And I know my time is up.
Yes, time is up. Thank you, Jessica.
So I just want to say that we have a lot of work to do, not just within the United States, but throughout the world. And so we are amazing advocates here within this organization and throughout this summit. If you'd like to learn more, just contact the Global Summit, contact us. I mean, the next speaker, you're gonna love her. She's probably gonna bash me, but yeah. And I love all you guys that have been speaking. We've been amazing.
Thank you, Jessica. Proud, strong, and visible. And from you, we do have only a couple minutes left. So instead of introducing you, Nadja, we'll go directly to Judy for our closing words. Please, Judy.
Thank you very much. And I'd really like to thank again WIN for its leadership role and all of you for your presentations today. I'd like to summarize the following way. Many of you have seen the film Crip Camp, which you can see on Netflix and other platforms. The reason I raise the film is for those of you who are into filmmaking, I strongly encourage you to be documenting the stories of disabled people in rural and urban areas in your countries to show the value of independent living. I think Stieg was his presentation was very important, as was Wendy's, where people really got into sharing personal knowledge and benefit. Independent living started about 50 years ago. We need to be celebrating that. There have been hundreds of thousands of disabled people who have benefited in many countries around the world. Yet, we know that many countries also have not benefited. Shataya, I think, was giving some very powerful comments on what is not going on in some aspects around the world. So we need to tell our stories. I think we also really need to recognize that our success, if it is to truly be expanded, needs money and more influence. Governments, development agencies, the summit, and the fact that it's being put on by GLAAD, which represents development agencies around the world, the International Disability Alliance, we need to be putting more pressure on development institutions to ensure that independent living is not just something that's over on the sideline. We talk about programs. We need to talk about significant implementation, which will enable disabled people to be free, and how the bias against disability and empowerment is still really reflected in the money that is being given out. Governments, when receiving money to deal with education, housing, transportation, whatever it may be, it needs to be a part of the granting of those funds, that disability is an integral part of what they're doing. We are not going to make the progress that we need to make if we are continuing to have to look in such narrow ways. So I encourage all of you to be in touch with your governments that are participating in this very important summit this week, holding governments and donors, whether it's the World Bank or other development banks or other country development, to really demonstrate to us how disability is being integrated into the billions, not thousands, not millions, but billions of dollars that are being given to countries around the world to deal with disaster, to deal with infrastructure, to deal with migration, etc. Independent living is something that people need to understand outside of the disability community. Whatever word we finally use, we are looking at empowerment, dignity, pride, rights, and inclusion. And one more thing, I'm very sorry. Please look at the report on Article 19 from the CRPD. It's about a 21-page report. It's a very, very important report. And it really, I think, quite articulately demonstrates areas that we need to continue to focus on and failures that currently exist.
Thank you, Judy, for this closure of this conference. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks for everything that's been said. And to Enil and Wen for organizing this. And we'll see you out in the movement. And there's been many challenges given today of how we need to continue to work and find the money to do so. Thank you all. Thanks for me. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you all. Bye-bye.